good morning, and welcome everyone. It's so great to be here, to be back. This kicks off our fall programming. We've been on a bit of a summer break since celebrating our 6th month anniversary in July, and we're excited to get back into it. And I just hope that everyone had a great summer, a restful summer, an enriching summer. I can say that I certainly did. I was traveling most of the summer internationally, which is rare, but after being on lockdown, I guess for 3 years, practically since the pandemic or pre-pandemic, I felt like I needed to go everywhere in one summer. So I went to Kenya, South Africa, in France, some work, some pleasure, but all just wonderful. But now we are back. And for most of us, that means back to school, back to routines, back to meetings, back to a heavy packed schedule. And I'm excited about our conversation today because we need as many tools as we can get to help us through this. And we're going to be talking about tools for social emotional learning for our children. But I think that will benefit us as well. And also just want to acknowledge we've had a lot of transitions in our organization, and I'm sure all of you have as well. We have Sunshines who we've watched grow up over the past 6 years, who are now gone off to college. We have Sunshines who are starting businesses, who are getting married and having babies, and just all kinds of exciting life transitions, which is what we want. That's why we're here. We want to help them grow and thrive and develop and reach their full potential. My two Sunshines are starting middle school and high school this year. This was the first week of school. And honestly, everyone says, oh, it goes so fast. So I can't believe they're so old. It hasn't gone fast for me. This has not been fast. Like, I have a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I've felt every one of those 14 years. It's been a long journey, so much so that I felt like, are we ever going to make it out of elementary school? Like, this is like, we've been at this for so long, we're still just in elementary school. So I'm excited for them to move on to the next phase of life, from middle school to high school, and kind of see the end in sight, or at least the end of this journey. And when I say that, of course, people say, well, it speeds up after that. So we'll see. But it's been a journey. I mean, it's not easy. It's not simple being responsible for other people's lives, for the complete development and nurturing and growth of another human being in the form of children. So we all take this role very seriously, and it requires a lot of thought and a lot of planning and a lot of investment in every aspect of their being, whether it's physical, when they're babies, you just have to make sure they stay alive. Like I was explaining to my son, like when you have a baby, the whole thing is like, are they breathing in the morning? Are they peeing enough? Are they pooping enough? Are they eating enough? So it's just about physical survival. And you always have that concern about physical survival, right? Like even now, like a lot of what we talk about at Mop United is making sure they survive, like physically, that they're alive. So that's just number one. But then you also have to think about their spiritual development. You have to think about their emotional development. You have to think about their mental health. You have to think about making sure that they have confidence in being able to access and develop their unique talents and to discover their purpose in this world. So it's just so much to think about. And we try to, at Mob United, think about it from all angles. So that's why I'm so excited to welcome back Coach Kumari Ghafoor-Davis, who is a national leader at Mob United, has been with us from the beginning, and is a renowned expert. So I'm just going to read some of her bio right quick before I turn it over. So Kumari Ghafoor-Davis, MSW, has over 25 years of experience in social services. She's a graduate of Columbia University School of Social Work, and she's worked with children and families for a majority of those years in schools, inpatient and outpatient programs, independent living and aging out programs for foster care youth, group homes, halfway houses, and crisis units for adults and children as a direct care manager, crisis social worker, and an administrator. She is currently the director of the Campaign for Racial and Ethnic Justice for Community Action Committee of Lehigh Valley, where she manages Generation Next college prep program, an enrichment program for elementary and middle school girls, and Color Outside the Lines, an initiative to encourage racial conversations and trainings within Lehigh Valley to promote inclusion and diversity and acceptance and anti-racist initiatives. As a social worker and parent coach, Kumari's consulting company, Optimistic Expectations, offers workshops to parents to offer more tools in their parental journey and students to promote more personal, academic, and social success. Kumari also offers cultural humility trainings and coaching for organizations for DEI and belonging, anti-racist efforts. She facilitates professional development trainings for teachers, administrators, and auxiliary staff on topics such as professionalism, conflict resolution, cultural sensitivity, implicit bias, the importance of cultural responsiveness in schools, etc. She trains and facilitates workshops all over the region in New Jersey, where she lives, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, California, nonprofit, churches, corporations, schools, etc. And she's also been an adjunct professor in continuing education for Essex County, Passaic County, Montclair State, Seton Hall Universities, and Hunter College in their sociology and social work departments since 2002. She is the Athena National Award winner for Lehigh Valley Region for 2021. Congratulations. I didn't know that. And we are just so happy to have you back, Kumari. Kumari has done this, or similar sessions with different angles a few times over the past 5 years since we started back to school sessions, just to get our minds right as parents, to help equip our children to be successful this school year. And I think a lot of this can go even beyond, the school setting. So Kumari, welcome back. And thank you for doing this. I know you have a busy Saturday, so we're gonna make it compact. And I just wanna shout out your sunshine, who's getting married in a couple of weeks, and say I'm so excited for him. I got a chance to meet him and his fiance a few years ago at our last in-person MLK Day event here in New York, where we hosted a HBCU fair, and they're both just so lovely. And I'm so excited, and I can't wait to see the beautiful photos. So I turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tapelsha. I truly appreciate you. And I'm so excited to be back. It has been a while. It has been a while. And I know that parents are eager to get their kids, acclimated into school in the new school year. And it's now the second year that we're out of COVID. And I know that it's just been a lot for parents and students. I mean, I've been talking a lot with parents, and just the emotional and mental health of our kids is so important right now, which is why this topic is so important. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence and learning today. This is one of those things that, as a parent coach and as a social worker, my entire career has been based around us as parents, making sure that, as you mentioned, our kids are emotionally and socially and mentally and academically prepared for their lives. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is just how we can assist our children to have the capacity to deal with their own behaviors and express themselves and talk about things when they're upset about things, and making good choices and decisions, and making sure their temperament and their self-control is intact. Because so many times as parents, we're just kind of like just making things work, going to work and taking care of them and making sure they're okay. But we've got to also make sure they're mentally and emotionally stable, so that they can go out into the world and be even greater sunshines than we already know they are. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So can you see my screen? All right. Just making sure you can see my screen. Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
All right. Thank you. So the theory of social emotional learning intelligence enhances one's capacity to integrate skills, attitudes, and behaviors to deal effectively and ethically with daily tasks and challenges. Like many similar frameworks, social emotional theories integrated framework promotes interpersonal, and cognitive competence. There are 5 core competencies that are taught in these settings. So when we think about social emotional theory and intelligence and learning, it has all to do with how our kids interpret information, how they perceive information, how they output information, and how they perceive themselves in the world. So a lot of this has to do with how we talk to them, how people around them talk to them, how they talk to themselves, and how they go into the world and mold the world. Because I mean, when you think about being a parent, as Depelsha already said, we're preparing our kids. I tell parents all the time, you have 17 summers. And like how Depelsha mentioned, how you're like, oh my goodness, these years are so important. Because we only have 17 summers, we have a lot to cram in before they leave us. So the 5 core competencies are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. Those are the 5 areas of social emotional intelligence and learning. So when we talk about self-awareness, we're talking about the ability to accurately recognize one's own emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence behavior. So this has a lot to do with how the world around us influences us, how what's going on in our homes influences us, the different things that happen at school influences our children, and even the way that our world as parents influence us to influence our kids. So if we have a bad day at work and we come in, when we have something going on in our own personal lives and our kids notice it, all these things have to do with self-awareness, and those things also affect our kids. So the ability to accurately assess one's strengths and limitations with a well-grounded sense of confidence, optimism, and growth mindset is a part of self-awareness. So that includes identifying emotions, accurate self-perception, recognizing strengths, self-confidence, and self-efficacy. And when you think about self-efficacy, obviously none of us are perfect, and obviously none of us are ever going to be completely effective, right? However, we want to recognize that we want to be able to identify emotions. This is something that we have to work on as parents, because sometimes we have a bad day and sometimes we are challenged in our lives, and we have to make sure that we can identify what those emotions look like and be able to talk about those emotions to our kids so that they can also express their emotions, because self-awareness is very real. I remember when my youngest son was like 3 years old, and we're driving in the car, and he was angry with me at something he had did, something that I had did, and I noticed in the back seat that he's very angry and he's mad and he's pouting, and I'm like, Ethan, are you okay? And he just turned his head to me, which is what he would always do. He'd go like this to me whenever he was mad at me when he was younger. And I waited for him to calm down. And afterwards I asked him, I said, tell me, what were you feeling when you were upset with me? And he said to me, I just saw red and I felt angry and I didn't want to talk about anything. And I honestly have always made sure that my kids can express themselves so that they can express the emotions that they feel, because it's important for our kids to know what emotion they're feeling, because we know as adults that things can happen where we get upset about something and then it spills over into our jobs and spills over into our relationships and spills over into other relationships that we have in our lives with our spouse, with our family members. So self-awareness is very important so that we can identify emotions and accurately have self-perception to say, I am angry, I am pissed off, I am feeling this kind of way, I am hurt. Because a lot of times, as we know, boys are told that they can't express emotion. Boys are told that they cannot cry. We heard that all the time when we were younger. And hopefully as parents, we're not telling our boys that, because we want to be able to help them express their emotions, help them to be able to say, instead of just being angry and being mad, being able to say, I am hurt by what you just said to me. That's important for us to be able to have as adults, as children, as people. So self-awareness is very important. To continue with social awareness, we also want the ability to take the perspective of and empathize with others, including those with diverse backgrounds and cultures, the ability to understand social and ethical norms for behavior, and to recognize family and community resources and supports and how it affects our perception of this awareness. So that has a lot to do with perspective taking and empathy, which is something that is extremely important in our world. In the work that we do at MOB, we know that we have to have empathy for our boys. We know that we want people to have empathy for our boys. We want the world to have empathy for our boys. We want the world to have empathy for us as people of color. So it's extremely important for us to appreciate diversity and have respect for others. So as parents, I want us to think about, how can teaching our children self-awareness affect their learning and self-concept? I want us to think about that as parents. And if you want to jot that down, that question down, and just think about that as a parent. How can teaching our children self-awareness affect their learning and self-concept? Because as we are working with our kids, we need to make sure that they are social and self-aware. All right. So next is self-management. So the ability to successfully regulate one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations, effectively managing stress, controlling impulses, and motivating oneself. The ability to set and work toward personal and academic goals. So this, of course, goes back to the example that I gave of at the time, my 3-year-old being able to express himself and have that self-management and self-control. Because the reality is, we want to be able to teach our kids to have self-control, self-awareness, self-management, to be able to say, this is how I'm feeling, to be able to effectively manage their stress. And let's be real, as parents, we don't always know how to effectively manage our stress. We let things spill over. We let things spill over at the job. We have, negative effects of our choices and decisions. We also don't always control our impulses. So we want to make sure that we are trying to help our children have self-management. It's extremely important for them to see it in us. And if we know that we don't necessarily have great self-management, because a lot of parents do not, we want to be able to express that. I know I might not be expressing myself in a way that you would understand. I know that I might not be expressing myself in a way that's effective right now. However, this is what I'm feeling, or this is what's going on for me right now, because it's very important for us to have self-management. And being able to motivate ourselves is extremely important to do that. So the ability to set and work toward personal and academic goals has a lot to do with that self-management as well. So every school year, we want to set goals with our kids. During the summer, I worked with my own 15-year-old now to have goals for the year so that we can know what we're working on and achieve those goals. We want to make sure that we're working towards, I tell some parents to have vision boards in their house so that we know what we're working on and we can all work towards that vision. And a part of that self-management, again, is impulse control, stress management, self-discipline, self-motivation, goal setting, and organizational skills. These are all a part of self-management. So as parents, I want us to think about, how can teaching our children self-management of their emotions affect their learning and social experience? How can teaching our children self-management of emotions affect their learning and social experience? Next, we're going to go into relationship skills. So the ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships with diverse individuals and groups, the ability to communicate clearly, listen well, cooperate with others, resist inappropriate social pressure, negotiate conflict constructively, and seek and offer help when needed. Now, this is one area that a lot of people struggle with, even as adults, because a lot of times when we weren't necessarily engaged in emotional intelligence and learning when we were younger, this affects our relationship building skills. A lot of times as adults, we stress over whether or not someone loves us when we're younger. If you remember being in love with someone and they didn't love you back, or if you remember giving yourself too much to someone who didn't really care, or if you remember having a childhood that wasn't always so pleasant, all these things affect our relationship building skills. And a lot of times as adults, even though we're adults, we don't communicate clearly. We don't listen well. We don't cooperate with others. We don't resist inappropriate social pressure. And a lot of times we do not negotiate conflict constructively. So these are things that even when we know as adults and parents that we don't have these skills, we want to try to embed those skills into our kids because we want them to be able to develop healthy relationships. Even if we know we're not in a healthy relationship ourselves, we want to talk to our kids about what healthy relationships look like. So, for example, I've talked with so many parents who are single parents and they didn't have a great relationship with their paramour, with the person that they had children with, and they sometimes tell their children about that person negatively, and that affects that child's image of themselves, affects that child's image of the way they see that parent that tells them these negative things, as well as the parent that they're talking about. And sometimes that can also harm the child in a way that causes them not to have healthy relationships later. So we want to make sure that as adults, we watch what we say to our kids. We want to make sure that as adults that we talk about relationships with our kids. Even if we're in a relationship that is not always healthy, we want to talk with them about what a healthy relationship looks like, what a rewarding relationship looks like. And of course, when it comes to, relationship building in terms of diverse individuals and groups, we know for sure that the world is going to always tell us who we are, especially as people of color. They're going to always tell us what we're about, especially as people of color. So we want to make sure that we're always building on ourselves and building on our relationships so that we can be solid and that we can grow in a way that's effective, as well as so that we can be successful. So part of relationship skills has to do with communication, social engagement, relationship building, and teamwork. So I want you to think about, as parents, how can our children's ability to express themselves when communicating affect their learning and social success? What does social success actually look like? And think about that. When you think about social success, I mean, all of us as parents want our kids to be, happy, and we want them to have good friends. We want them to choose good friends and make good decisions. But the reality is, if our kids don't have good self-concept, if our kids don't have good self-esteem, if they don't know who they are, they can choose poor relationships. That is very honestly true, right? So we want to make sure that we're building on our children so that they can express themselves and communicating, so that it will affect their learning and social success positively. So again, I want you to think about, how can our children's ability to express themselves when communicating affect their learning and social success, and what does social success look like? The next area is responsible decision making. This has a lot to do with the ability to make constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions based on ethical standards, safety concerns, and social norms. So the realistic evaluation of consequences of various actions and a consideration of the well-being of oneself and others has a lot to do with responsible decision making. And when you think about that, again, it goes back to how our children see themselves, how we see ourselves as adults. Sometimes as parents, we don't have good self-concept. We don't have good self-esteem, and our decisions are not always the best. But again, we want to talk to our kids about that. And I know that we don't always want to go into full detail, of course. But at the same time, the more honest we are with our kids about some of the poor decisions that we've made, could possibly help them not make the same poor decisions. So we want to talk with them about ethical standards and what it means to be an ethical person. I talk to my kids all the time about doing the right thing when no one's looking, which is integrity. And I literally would make them repeat that over and over again when they were younger, so they knew that that's what integrity looks like, doing the right thing when no one's looking. And that responsible decision making has a lot to do with the social interactions that they have. So if they're feeling good about themselves, when they see something in the world that's not all that great, they'll make that choice in their mind. I don't want to get involved in that. We want to talk to our kids about those safety concerns and social norms that can happen in their lives on a daily basis. Of course, as children of color, because of the way the world is, they're going to be perceived a certain way. But we want to still talk to our kids about how they need to love themselves regardless, how they need to make sure that they know who they are and not let anyone tell them who they are, so they can make responsible decisions. So a part of responsible decision making is identifying problems, analyzing situations, solving problems, evaluating, reflecting, and ethical responsibility. So what I want you to think about as parents is, how can our children's decision making and problem solving skills assist them in their social and emotional journey? Ask that question again. How can our children's decision making and problem solving skills assist them in their social and emotional journey? And then also think about how, as parents, our decision making can affect our children and can affect their decision making. Because we want to make sure that as parents, again, we are not, of course, giving our children every poor decision we've made, but we do want to talk with them about what things we have done that could have caused this, and what things they could do that could cause certain things as well, so that they can talk through their decisions and make good choices. All right. So those are the 5 areas of the 5 core areas of social emotional intelligence and learning. But we also want to have identity, culture, and emotional intelligence as well. How we see the world, not the way it is, but the way that we are. That's one of the quotes that I like to use. And when we think about emotional intelligence, how can it influence our identity, our development, or our culture? How all these different areas that we just talked about, how they can be influenced by our identity, and how our identity can be influenced by these different areas. So how our identity can be influenced by social awareness and relationship skills, responsible decision making, problem solving, self-awareness, self-management, and then how all those things can also affect our identity. We want to talk about those things with our kids. We want to make sure they understand who they are. We want to make sure they understand how important it is to be able to identify what they're feeling, who they are, why they are, and also think about all these areas and how it affects our identity. So as we think more and more around being a parent that is allowing our kids to grow, allowing our kids to express themselves. I remember as a child being told kids are supposed to be seen, not heard. And I, even in my book, 10 Parenting Strategies to Raise Confident, Successful Children, I say that I don't know whether or not that even worked back in the day. Children should be seen, not heard. You shouldn't say anything out loud. I mean, because realistically, it kind of just made us stuff our feelings, right? So, at least in my opinion, anyway. So, a lot of times we want to make sure that when we're talking to our kids, we're telling them to express themselves, because we don't want them to stuff feelings. We want them to have good self-awareness. We want them to have good self-management. We want them to have good social awareness and relationship skills and responsible decision-making and problem-solving skills. We want those skills to be embedded in our kids so that when they go out into the world, they can make decisions that make sense. When they go out into the world, they can make decisions that when they choose something that's not so positive, they can take responsibility for it. They can apologize for it. One of the things that I do love about my children is that we've talked so much about self-awareness and social awareness that when something happens and if they do something that they should not have done, they do come back and they apologize afterwards. Even after they've been upset or after they've calmed down, they'll come back and apologize. And I'm very grateful for that, because it's something that I think that we have to have self-humility, which is a part of all these things as well. So also about dominant culture and other cultures and emotional learning. So when we're thinking about how the world affects us in dominant culture, which basically is white supremacy culture, which we know is white supremacy culture as all the different areas we navigate on a daily basis. So all those areas like education, how our kids are in school and how they go out into the world and have to go to the supermarket and have to buy things and how they're viewed when they go out into that world. And just the fact that our kids are viewed and perceived as something that could be negative, and when we know that they're shining stars, right? So we have to make sure that we're talking with our kids about that cultural piece as well, about that self-management and self-awareness so that they understand their emotions versus their expectations of themselves, the self-regulation, conscious and unconscious biases, theirs and others, impulse control, having and setting goals and being organized. All these different things have to do with how the dominant culture sees our children. And we want to make sure that they're strong in who they are so that they can have these strong dominant features in themselves. And then responsible decision-making and problem-solving skills. Analyzing and responding to situations, social norms, safety for self and others, and reflection, and being able to make sure they can reflect on things that they've decided and be able to even, pivot when they need to in their lives to make better choices. That's a part of how dominant culture sees us, how we view ourselves, and how we view the world. So I do want to ask you all to take away, we can answer some questions if we can, to Pelsha. But how does social emotional intelligence and learning and emotional intelligence apply to our children stepping into leadership roles and responsibilities? I want us to think about that. I want us to think about, as parents, we want our kids to thrive. We want them to strive for everything they possibly can as adults. And how do these different core values play into our kids stepping into leadership roles, being responsible leaders as children and as adults? Stepping into who they are and recognizing who they are so that when they become adults, they're not making poor choices. Even when they're teenagers, not making poor choices. We try to make sure that we're instilling leadership skills in our children when they're young. We try to instill those things when they're 5, 6 years old, 7, 8 years old. But at the same time, as we instill those things when they're younger, we're hoping that those things carry into their teenage lives when we know that they're going to be seriously influenced by their friends. So again, how does social emotional learning intelligence and emotional intelligence apply to our children stepping into leadership roles and responsibilities? That's another question I want us to ask ourselves as parents. So please let me know if there's any questions, if there's any comments.
Yes, I have questions. There's
I'll stop
just
sharing my
so
screen.
much. Okay, no, I want you to leave it up. I actually
Okay.
want to go back. I want to go back through each one
Okay.
because it's so rich with like information in terms of what we should be focused on. So much so, and I saw your presentation in advance, but I didn't really process it until I'm hearing you talk through it. And as I'm hearing each of these things, I'm thinking about like how few adults have these skills, right? I'm thinking about all of my interactions in life at work and relationships and family. And I don't think these skills are widely acquired and developed, right, in the general population. So I'm wondering, and I'm going to, work my way to a question, but I'm just reacting
It's
mainly.
all,
Like,
no
you know what I
worries.
mean? Like, I'm wondering how does the society of, at what, I want to know if you agree with that. You're a social worker, right? Like,
Absolutely.
how does the society of parents who don't themselves have these tools impart them to children? Can you acquire them later in life? Are there ways for children to develop them if they don't have parents who have these tools and skills? So there's a lot in there. So, and I don't even know where to start, but I'll just leave it there to ask you, like, how many people do you think are fully functioning in this way, self-aware and, able to have good self-perception and navigate relationships and make responsible decisions and be aware when they don't and be reflective enough? Like, how, because I almost feel like it's, for some people, innate. Like, I would like to believe, or I've been told, like, this is emotional intelligence is one of my superpowers, I've been told. Like, I've, in multiple jobs, replaced people who were highly competent professionals but weren't emotionally intelligent and culturally aware, right? And that within itself. And so it sometimes feels like it's something people have, or they don't. So I just want, I guess my broad question is, and you can pick it up from anywhere in there, like, how do people develop these skills if it doesn't come
Absolutely.
natural to them, and if they don't have parents who have them?
Absolutely. And I'm going to go back to this slide where we talk about the 5 core competencies and where they come from. So in this slide, it shows that all of these different components come from homes and communities, in schools, in classrooms, in curriculum and instruction, in school-wide practices, and of course in family and community partnerships, right? So all of these different competencies come from these places and also get pulled away from by these places, right? So when you think about, like, your first question in terms of how many adults actually have it, it is not a large number, because as adults, sometimes we react to things that we've experienced in our childhoods too, right? So a lot of times we don't even have that self-awareness that something that happened to us in our childhood kind of, and I don't never like to use the word broken, but I hear that a lot, that it bruised us in ways that we do not realize. And I think that a lot of us, like, I'm one of those people too that's an empath, right? We take in that information, like we feel it from other people. Like sometimes you even almost feel empathy for people that don't have this, right? And because of the fact that we're in a world that is so mean, it's such a mean world, like, and so many people operate on, I'm just going to do, I'm going to get mine, get what I want for me and forget everybody else. Unfortunately, these different components end up falling aside. So we don't have empathy for others. We don't necessarily have that self-management. We don't necessarily have that social awareness, because we're just trying to get mine and I'm forget everybody else. And I don't even care what you have, right? So unfortunately, I also have not met a huge amount of people that have had it. But what I have noticed is that sometimes at some point in life, you hit a mirror that shows you that you're lacking in certain things, like self-awareness or self-perception, or you continue to end up in the same relationship over and over again, and you're wondering why I keep ending up in the same relationship with the same kind of guy, the same kind of female. And then you're like, I need to reflect on what I'm doing, right? So sometimes it ends up coming in that way, where things in your life keep smacking you in the face and you're like, I need to change something. Something's wrong, right? Like one of those things that, and I know a lot of people do, some people love Oprah, some people don't. But one of the things that I like, one of the sessions that I saw her on her show when she had it was, life is supposed to move like this. It's supposed to flow. So when life starts to do this and it sits stagnant, you need to start self-reflecting and figure out, what am I doing in my life that's not flowing, right? So I think a lot of times you're right. A lot of folks don't have it. I've also been in jobs where people are like, "Oh my goodness, you work so well with people." Like people even tell me now, my team, they're like, "Your team is so close." Like we're doing mental health days and hikes and things like that, because you have to build your team. You have to build that to be a great leader, right? So, I think that a lot of times people live life in a way that they stumble and fall, and then at some point in time they realize, something's going on. I need to fix some things. I need to tweak some things in my life. So that's how I think a lot of people learn these skills. I don't think we're all taught. I don't think
right. So they have to go through experiences to teach
yes,
them most of the time.
yes,
That's interesting. We have a
yeah,
few audience questions, but I'm going to get in one more of
of
mine
course.
first. How are you seeing schools focusing on this more? And it also, like, I'm having a lot of insights just listening to this. It struck me that Grant's he just changed schools. With the prior school where he's been for 7 years, they focus heavily, like heavily, on social emotional learning. So much so that they said that it was like 50% social emotional learning and 50% academics. And I have to say, as a parent, this annoyed me to no end, because I was like, I'm not here for social. This is my reaction. Like, I'm not here for social emotional learning. Like, I'll handle that. Like, it's my job to teach my child like how to be a good person and how to navigate life and manage his emotions. I need you to teach school, to teach him academics. Like, whereas, can we talk about math? Can we talk about how's he doing on reading? How do we stretch him? But so much of the conversation was about social emotional learning that it really just, I thought it was over the top. But I want to see what you're seeing in schools in this regard. And this was a private school. But what are you seeing in schools in this regard? And is, like, what's your perspective on how much schools should be focusing on this?
I'll tell you two things with that. First of all, a lot of schools are definitely focusing more on social emotional intelligence learning, and a lot of schools are focusing more on trauma informed as well as restorative practices. I think that schools have taken a larger role in teaching these things because they recognize that the reason why they have so many issues with a lot of the students in school is because they're not learning it at home. So whereas you and I are like, I can teach them that, a lot of parents are not teaching the kids that. I mean, even to the point of like, there's some schools that have made comments of how the kids are so traumatized from even the pandemic, and kids are going through so much in their mental health that schools are now focusing specifically on trauma because kids are not knowing how to process what they're going through because they're not learning it at home. So that is why a lot of schools have started focusing on it. I appreciate it. I do get the academics is important. I've also recognized that one of the reasons why I haven't put um, Ethan, my 15-year-old, in private school, in this is only with me, is because the schools that I have had, even with our oldest son, he went through a school that was predominantly white skin identity persons. He went through a lot of emotional bruising while he was there. And I know in my heart that Ethan being an empath, I know though Kamar turned out phenomenal, I know that I don't want Ethan to go through that same thing again, right? So because of the fact that I know that academics is going to come, and I want him to be intact socially. I want him to be intact. I want his self-awareness to be extremely high because I know how hard I worked on it to make sure Kamar's self-awareness was high in that environment. So I think that a lot of times parents don't all they of course we're going to do a good job and we're going to love on our kids and things like that, but I don't think they recognize how much the world and how the world affects our kids and their learning and their intelligence, and how even if your kid is a straight A student and is an honor society and does all the good things right, if they don't have strong emotional intelligence, they can become on drugs, they can start making poor choices, they can end up in jail. I mean, all of those different things. They could be brilliant and still make poor choices. So that's why emotional learning is intelligence is so important.
Yeah, that's true. Brilliance can be
Yeah,
used in a lot of different ways, you know.
absolutely. You could become the
Watch
best bank robber.
watch The Wire. They were brilliant.
Right, right, right.
So let me get to a question from Sylvia from Facebook. And this is, a question that's near and dear to my heart. Her question is, do you have suggestions on using these tools for boys on the autism spectrum? My son will be 13, and this is a difficult period for him going through puberty. And as you know, I have a now 14-year-old son on the autism spectrum. I want to hear your perspective. For me, it's very difficult, very, very difficult to think about this because he doesn't have the same level of social awareness, interest.
Right.
It's very hard to even process. And I don't know Sylvia's son and like where he is on the spectrum, his ability to be self-reflective in these things. But any thoughts on this?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've known parents who have worked with coaches that work specifically with children that have autism, because there are still things that you can assist your child in expressing themselves and speaking about certain things, when there's certain feelings that they have, even if it's just kind of like describing it, because I've known parents who have children who are on the spectrum that become very angry and they just scream opposed to expressing what it is. So I've known parents that have worked with, like, I even know a woman in Jersey that works specifically with children with autism, and she works with parents to help their children be able to express at least the emotions that they could be feeling. So if it, even if it's just I'm screaming because all I see is red, they're talking about, okay, what does the red look like? Is it bright red? Is it darker? You know what I mean? So, just being able to try and reach that child where they are emotionally. Yeah. So I know some folks that have worked specifically with people who do work with children with autism. I definitely know that it is very tough in that respect because of that disconnect there sometimes with the social and self reflection. But it's also something that I know that I've known some autistic children that were so loving and so peaceful and, and so kind. And then I also have known folks who tell me that their child is very angry. So it's just about us recognizing that where our child is and trying to meet them where they are and trying to make sure that we're still having those conversations if we can. And working with someone that's a professional that can assist us in that.
Yeah, no,
Hope
that's
that
great
answered your
advice.
question.
And I feel like my son Garrett has been given a lot of self-regulation tools as I'm thinking about this real time, like whether it's, his ABA therapist or other educators teaching him how to like calm down. So do things like deep breaths or go take a break, or just getting them out of an environment that's triggering some sensory response that you're not even aware of, like get into a quiet environment. Also sensory tools, like he's shifted from whether he needs to hold, a stick or a ball or a phone or something that he plays in the water all the time. And a psychiatrist was saying, like, it looks like obsessive compulsive behavior, but it's really just that's how he's self-regulating. He goes to turn on the sink, and something about seeing water running in the sink calms him down. So he's doing it as a tool for self-regulation. And we don't even recognize it as that. We just see it as like, why are you doing that? Stop doing that. But he needs to do that to feel better. Is how it was explained to me. So looking at like what they need and setting up that environment and giving them the tools are what I've learned about that so far. So next question. This is from Linnell, and I think this is about the wheel and all of your points. Do these points change as our children become adults, or do we continue to teach them differently as adults? What do you think about these skills?
Right. I would say that it's a continuum. It's definitely a continuum, because when you think about it as an adult, we still have to have self-awareness. We still have to have self-management. We still have to have social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making skills. It just looks differently because we have more responsibility, right? So, as adults, when we talk about self-management, we're talking about, when something happens at work, can you calm down, right? When something happens in your personal life, are you screaming in front of your kids? Just things like that show up in our lives, that as adults we still dealing with the same components. However, as adults, it becomes more intense, even because we have more responsibility, which is the reason why we want to teach it to our kids when they're younger, so that as they get older and the responsibility becomes more intense, they can handle those emotions and they can handle these different components in a way that's successful. Hope that answered your question.
Yes. Okay. We have a question. Well, I'm going to combine these questions. 2 questions from Kim. Part 1 is, how do we get educators to see their deficits? And part 2 that's related is, do you find that educators are set on the old way of managing emotions, the suck it up mentality, especially Black education leaders, and that empathy is missing because older educators didn't receive it?
Oh, wow. That's a great question, Kim. So your first question, repeat it again so I can.
The first one is, how do we get educators to see their deficits? Yes.
So to be honest with you, the past year and a half, when COVID, quote unquote ended and we all went back to school live, I don't know an educator that wasn't challenged and didn't see that, oh my gosh, this is a lot. That didn't realize, oh my goodness, how do I deal with this? How do I deal with all these things that's going on in my classroom? Because I think we had talked about last year when we did a back to school about how there was a lot of fights You know, there was fights breaking out across the country. I don't know if you all were paying attention on Twitter. There was all kinds of Twitter challenges. Kids were pulling toilet stools off of walls. They were putting watermelons in toilet bowls. I'm like, literally, my son was sending me pictures of kids running down a hallway with a toilet seat in their hands. So it's like kids, you know, and of course, a lot of the adults, and they're like, what's going on with these kids? They're out of control, right? So I think that educators definitely are struggling. And I think that a lot of schools have noticed it and they're putting things in place. And then unfortunately, I'm still seeing schools that are still blaming the kids. So yeah. Next question. What's the second question yet?
The second one, I accidentally raised my hand. I don't know how I did that, but I was saying, giving you an amen. The second one was, do you find the educators are set on the old way of managing emotions, the suck it up mentality, especially older Black educators who, you know, like that traditional stern way of like, sit down, shut up, be still. There's a school, you know, lots of schools that are led by older Black educators. There's like in Brooklyn, a strong Caribbean influence. If you go to school like old Caribbean people, it's going to be like, sit down, you might get hit on the hand with a ruler, like that old school method of discipline, and just like, do what I say, don't ask questions. It's kind of like the opposite of what you're suggesting, you know, like, I was telling Grant, like, you would never survive at this school down the street because they're not into self-expression. They don't want to hear what you have. They're not into like what you think about it and your opinion, and you're debating whether or not you think you should do every little thing. Like, there's no debate in some educational environments. So how much of that do you still see? And like, you know, that empathy missing, although it worked for a lot of people. So I don't want to completely toss it out, but
I don't know if it worked for us. Right. I don't know if do as I say, not as I do worked for us. I don't know if it worked or if it made us stuff our feelings, if you will. Right. Because I remember that world, you know, I'm 50 years old. I remember that world of, you know, oh, kids are supposed to just be quiet. You're not supposed to be seen, not heard. Do as I say, not as I do. I don't know if that really worked. I think I even have that in my book as well, you know, about the fact that, you know, that whole system of just sit down and shut up has made a lot of our children angry. And I'm not saying it didn't make us angry when we were younger, but now that the world has become more self-expressive, if you will, where kids are allowed to express themselves and people are allowed to express who they are, I don't know if that works anymore. But I do see that still. I do see that in a lot of quote unquote urban districts, if you will. And I have noticed that a lot of educators are struggling because of it. But I've also seen some folks that are kind of like pivoting to a way where they're like making their classroom environment more loving because of it. Because how do you teach kids that don't like you? Back in the day, it was kind of like, just get good grades. Just do what you have to do. No, teachers also have to recognize that if a kid does not like you, they will not learn from you. So to some degree, you're going to have some kids that are just going to sit down and shut up and do what they're supposed to do. But you may have half your class that doesn't. And if you have half a class that's failing and half a class that's not, there's something you're doing, not the class. Right. So I think that it definitely has to be where we're having more conversations and dialogues around that, because so many teachers are definitely still thinking that way. I don't think they're necessarily adjusting to the times and the way that our kids are socialized now. Our kids are not socialized the same way that we were. Just the internet alone and the internet access alone makes it so that they are not socialized the way that we were. I mean, they literally can sit there and watch 2 hours on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube videos of all types of things that we never had access to. So we definitely have to think about that difference in terms of how we're growing up and how they're growing up.
So, yeah, it's so different. It's really
very
shift,
different,
you know. And like some people would just say these kids are just bad these days. They don't listen.
They say that so much.
But,
we had a kid that called kids clowns. We were like, okay, you can't work with our kids anymore.
That's hilarious.
We got rid of him. We went to the principal immediately. We went to the principal the next day. He cannot work with our kids next year.
I can just see that unfolding. And someone, Victory said it didn't work. Some of us learned by stress, but not to the maximum ability. So it stifles a person's ability to grow and develop because they can't fully express themselves and just explore their own thinking. If you're constantly being shut down from even saying what you think or feeling what you feel.
what does that make us do as adults? It makes us stuff our
Yeah.
feelings. It makes us not to be able to express ourselves. We can't even have conversations and reflective dialogue without screaming and yelling at each other because we
Mm-hmm.
shut down immediately because I don't like the fact that you're disagreeing with me. Like, come on.
Right.
We have to have dialogue.
Mm. This is like a whole sermon. I mean, this is much deeper, like as I'm thinking about it, because I just know so many adults who don't have the ability to do this. So
Absolutely.
what I would like to do, if you can go through each one of the slides again, I just want to hear your perspective on like how do we develop these particular skills? Like this is page 1, right?
This is the core competencies.
Right. But can we go to like the first page,
Okay.
whether it's self-awareness?
So self-awareness.
I just wanted to dig a little deeper on each of these. And like, do you have any, if you look at this list of things we're trying to develop in our children and ourselves, if you don't already have it, like what are some ways we can specifically help our children develop self-awareness, like their experiences we can give them, or their tests, role playing. Like if you think about how you would help someone develop this, like what
Absolutely.
would you suggest?
So I'll tell you something that I do. When my son comes home from school, we always have dialogue in the car about what happened in school. Since he was little, I would ask him, who'd you play with on the playground? I would say, what happened on the playground? What kind of things were kids saying on the playground? How did you handle it? Just asking him, when that happened, how did it make you feel? What emotions came up for you? We talk about things like that, right? Because self-awareness has a lot to do with our emotions and how we perceive ourselves and others, right? And self-awareness has a lot to do with how we assess our own strengths as well as our limitations. So when you're thinking about that ability to assess, if a situation is stressful around me, can I handle myself? Do I have self-control? Like a kid is doing something that they should not be doing in the classroom. Do I join in, right? We have conversations and dialogues all the time around where, okay, there's a kid laughing, they're doing something they have no business doing. Did you laugh with them? Did you join in? Why did you feel you need to join in? Was it something that you felt like you needed to join in so that everyone around you laughed at you too? Because you just wanted to, get appreciation or get somebody to say, oh, he's funny. But, just having that dialogue around that self-reflection around who I am and why I'm doing the things that I'm doing, so that it's not just actions. It becomes, why am I making this choice? Did I make this choice because I was wanting people to like me? Or did I make this choice because it was funny at the time? Just to be able to have that conversation and dialogue so that they have a well-grounded sense of self, confidence, that they have a growth mindset, because we want to always make sure we're teaching that, how can we do things differently next time? Like when my kids were younger, I would always ask them when they made a poor choice, I would say, and I never say bad, I always say poor choice. I say, how can you do things differently next time? What can you do different to have a better result next time? What kind of result do you want to have? Because again, as parents, we don't want the kids to just have our result, right? Because sometimes that's how we think. If a kid becomes a lawyer and a doctor, oh, they're successful. Yes, we made it, right? But if the kid is struggling socially, if the kid can't express themselves, if they have no, all those things take part in being a phenomenal person, not just a phenomenal doctor, attorney, teacher, all those different things. So making sure that we're putting that grounded sense of self in them is a part of self-awareness.
That's excellent. So having conversations that help them to self-reflect on their experiences and reactions.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's go to social awareness. I think that's next. Awareness. We have a question about this. So the question is, can you give an example of how we teach social awareness? My sons are in a predominantly Black environment, so they didn't experience some things until they were teenagers and young adults. And she referenced, for example, with the gender pronouns, it's a challenge.
Yeah. So social awareness, a part of that is being able to empathize with others, right? As well as recognizing as parents of color that everyone may not always have empathy for our kids. So we want to also make sure we have that dialogue with them and how that affects them, right? So when you talk about the fact that our kids are going out into a world where there's so much influence and like things are coming at them every single day on a daily basis that we're like, what did you hear? Right? So, just the fact that when our kids go out into the world, everything we taught them at home could be shifted by their perspective of what happens to their friends, right? You know, part of that social awareness comes to us recognizing that, like this mom said, their kid is in an area that's predominantly Black. So that is going to definitely influence them, because when they go out into the world, it's not going to be like that, one, right? And also, when they're being influenced by folks around them, they want to have a good sense of self around other people of color as well. So, for example, there are a lot of people of color who don't feel comfortable around other people of color, right? There are a lot of people of color where when they go out into the world, they become somebody else. So we want to make sure that our kids are having a perspective of empathy for others as well as empathy for themselves. So I would I would say to that mom, you're absolutely right that our kids are going to be influenced by different things, including gender identity and all that. But to be honest with you, our kids have a better perspective of gender identity than we probably did, because when we were younger, certain things were not accepted. They were not allowed, quote unquote. It was wrong, right? I know for sure that I can ask my 15-year-old about pronouns and he can explain it to me if I don't necessarily understand it, right? Or I know that sometimes when our children are, honestly, our kids can be more empathetic than we can be to the pronouns and to gender identity, because of the fact that so much is going on around them and they're seeing in the world, and that you see it on television now. It's more pronounced. People are very upset about that are older, but our kids get it. So part of that social awareness is making sure that you're talking to your kids every day, what they're experiencing, what they're seeing, you know, how they're perceiving what's going on in their life, how people are perceiving them, what they think somebody thought of them when they did something, you know, what they thought of somebody when they made a choice, all those different things about social awareness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it does. A lot more talking to kids than happening.
Yes, yes,
right? Basically, you have to talk about all these things.
Yes. So, because a part of that becomes like your perspective of things and how you think people perceive you, and having that dialogue, right? I know, like I was just telling this story the other day. When my 15-year-old was around 10 or 11, he went with one of my colleagues to a comic. I think it was a Comic-Con or something like that in the area, and when they went into a store after they went to the Comic-Con, because they had books and he had a book bag that he had gotten from the Comic-Con, and she took him into a store that was predominantly white, and he immediately said to her, "Can you hold my bag and my books that we got from the library?" And she's like, "Why?" And he's like, "Because I don't want to go in here with things that I got from there, because I don't want them to think that I stole it." And he was like 10 or 11 when he did this. Wow. So when I picked him up from her and I got home, she called me later crying, because she's like, "This is what he said to me." And when he explained why he wanted me to hold his things, I'm in my head like, holy crap, this kid is so young to know to do this. And his awareness of the fact that the world perceives him in this way is crazy. And she was so upset, because she's like, "I'm so sorry he has to deal with that. But I just took the books from him." And I was like, "Okay, don't worry about it, Ethan. I got you." You know what I mean? So
yeah, that's very heavy.
Yes. Yeah. And the fact that she's a white skin identity person, and the fact that it opened her eyes to the way this kid, who's a child of color, knows that he's perceived.
Wow.
Like, Ethan won't even put his hands in his pockets in a store. He won't pull his phone out in a store. If his phone's not in his hand in the store, he's not pulling it out while he's in the store. Which is unfortunate that he has to do, but he started doing that on his own.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, "Why are you answering the phone while you were in the store?" Because I'm not pulling my phone out my pocket while I'm in that store.
Wow. Okay. Let's go to the next one.
Okay. Self-management.
Self-management. This is very important, and something that a lot of people don't have. I look at these things like a combination of impulse control, stress management, self-motivation, goal setting, organizational skills. Like, that's a lot of stuff. It's all very helpful in life. But how can we help our children develop these things?
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. A lot of adults do not have self-management. And a lot of adults didn't learn self-management when they were younger. And as they got older, they kind of just pivoted and adjusted to, "I'm just going to do what I want." Right? So You have a lot of adults who think of self-management as, well, I'm controlling myself by not punching you in the face when you upset me. You know, you're like that.
Exactly. Right.
But at the same time, they don't necessarily effectively manage stress. They don't necessarily, control their impulses. They may not punch you when you upset them, but they're talking about you behind your back, or they're mad the whole day because you've upset them and they don't know how to express what they feel. So, and obviously motivating oneself is a part of that. So when we think about working towards personal and academic goals as parents with our children, we want to think about helping them recognize, like I mentioned before, when I'm upset, what I'm feeling, when I'm hurt, being able to distinguish between anger and hurt. Because again, a lot of times boys are told don't cry, they're told don't express emotion, stuff you're feeling. So we want, and I've noticed this so much in my career, that a lot of men do not know the difference between anger and hurt. So when they're hurt, it comes out as anger. When they're actually hurt by something you said, it comes out in rage. So we want to make sure that they know the distinction between hurt and anger, rage, what all those emotional and feelings are. I have there's an emotional chart in my office of all the emotions you can feel. Like even getting one of those charts and going through all those feelings with your children so that they can express themselves and have good self-management and be able to, managing stress is one thing that a lot of people don't know how to do. But like you mentioned before, how your baby was shown to breathe, to, take time, and again, because the fact that so many of us saw our parents not manage stress well, we didn't learn how to manage stress well. So we do want to talk to our kids about, what do you do when you're upset? Do you breathe, right? Do you make sure that you're counting to 10? Like how I know for sure that when my children are upset, I don't try to talk to them. They need to calm down first. So like when Ethan was 3 years old and he was in the car, I let him calm down first. And I asked him, what were you feeling when you were mad with me? What was going on in your head? Because you want to make sure they can process those emotions and be able to talk about stress and how they manage it. I told my kids from the time my oldest one, who's now going to be 30, was born, you're entitled to every feeling you feel, but we just have to express it constructively and effectively.
That's great advice. And it would be good to see your feeling. You said you have a chart of all the different feelings. I think we think of feelings very narrowly, but I was a part of some workshop where they had all these different feelings. You had to choose what color you were feeling. And it was like probably 50 different feelings. We just think of happy, sad, angry, there are all these other variations and combinations that can lead us to react in all kinds of ways.
And it comes out that way too. Like when it's guilt, when you're embarrassed, they come out in ways. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it comes out as anger.
Right. Wow. And I just wanted to make a note on, goal setting and organizational skills. Those are things that we can more explicitly give people tools to do. Like I've done goal setting workshops for young people, for high school students, to think about what do you want to accomplish this year? What do you want to accomplish in 3 years, 5 years? Now that I'm this old, it's more like the next 10 years. But in organizational skills, like there are tools, you can create lists, there are project management tools, there's actual technology that can help you to organize, and systems like setting up your physical environment in a way that's easy to find things and navigate, and where everything is. So those things, I think there's a lot we can do to help people. Now that I'm this age, like I hired an organizer for my house, to structure where things go so that everybody knows you go back to this place to get this thing all the time. And where to put things, right?
Right. So, and I know that's important too when you have a child that's autistic, to make sure that
let me tell you, Garrett is the best person in the house on this. He's not gonna let anything be out of place. Everything goes back to where it's supposed to go. That's the one person we can count on to do that. I was taking very personal. I was taking a shower. I worked out. I was taking a shower and I left my workout clothes in the bathroom floor. By the time I got out of the shower, Garrett had come picked up the clothes and put them in a hamper, because these are supposed to be in the hamper. They're not supposed to be on the floor. So he's constantly just putting dishes in the cabinet. That's his thing.
It's a part of his brilliance. It's a part of his brilliance. Yes, I love it. And you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Like goal setting is so important. So, like I mentioned before, we can have vision boards in our houses. We can have what the goals are for the school year. What are we trying to hit? What are we trying to do? Because again, our kids do need that organization. Like I know, like the couple nights before school, Ethan and I organized his room so that we could make sure that he knew where things were, and we put the books on the shelf, so that we can make sure that you can find things. Room is messy right now because he likes to keep things on the floor, but we want to always make sure we have that dialogue with our kids about organization and goal setting for sure.
Yeah. Yes, I know we are running out of time, so we're gonna get to, I think we have 2 more.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So relationship skills. And this is a part of self-management, social management, social awareness, because we want to, as we're talking about communicating clearly, listening well, cooperating with others, what does that look like? Right? Because sometimes people think communicating is, you heard what I said, and you need to listen to what I said, right?
That's what mostly, I said what I said. That's communication. And
exactly.
You know what I mean. You know what you
exactly.
did.
You know exactly what I'm talking about. So unfortunately, communicating clearly has to be a two-way street, right? It has to be, I heard you, you heard me, we had dialogue, we had conversation, we didn't just stuff it. All of that has to do with communicating clearly. Listening well has a lot to do with, me actually hearing what you said, me repeating back what I said, saying, what did you hear me just say to you? Because sometimes that's important for us to say to our kids, because I say things to my husband and he did not hear what I said, right? So we want to make sure that we have that dialogue about, what did you just hear me say exactly? Because even when we give our kids directives and we say, get this and this and this, and our kids come back with something different, right? What did you hear me ask you to get? So, and of course, cooperating with others and being able to have that dialogue back and forth and not thinking of it as always being personal, that people are attacking you, because that's part of what the communication part is, where people don't hear others because they think that when you're not agreeing with me, you're attacking me. No, I just disagree with you. We're entitled to disagree.
Yeah, and that's okay. We're not going to all see things the same way.
Absolutely. But it's important for us to know that. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is great. This is something we can definitely model with our children and how we communicate with them and how we encourage them to communicate with us, and playing back what we each heard, understood, felt from those interactions and conversations. Like very, very important.
Right. And being able to go back and say, I'm sorry if you misstep, because I know for sure I've had to apologize to my kids. I'm still not perfect. I try to be a good communicator, but I'm fully aware sometimes my oldest is like, you are not telling me exactly what's going on here. You are not communicating with me. So me making sure that we can also recognize when we're not necessarily communicating properly.
Yes. No, I know. And I'm reminded, I'm in Jack and Jill. I'm reminded of the Jack and Jill Creed. It's like this whole thing that mothers are supposed to do. And it's like not making your kids feel angry and apologizing to them. I was like, this is a lot for little kids. I'm not doing all this. So, but this is what we have to do to encourage communication and relationships.
Right. And so that they can see it, because we want our kids to be able to apologize. We want our kids to be able to say, I'm sorry when they do something. So we do
have if you hurt them.
Yes. You do have to model. It's important. I mean, even though we have, as parents, we have big egos. I've met some parents that are like, I'm not doing that, But again, how does that affect your kids, right? How does that affect your kids?
A lot of people don't have the capacity, though. So many people don't have the capacity themselves. They've never done it. They've never experienced it. Nobody taught them. So we need to I'm going to go to the last one. We need to do a follow-up on this, Kumari, where we need to train the moms on how to do these things first, and
capacity building. Where we're going to do a capacity building training.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So responsible decision making. And this has a lot to do with constructive choices and personal behaviors and social interactions based on ethical standards. So I know as parents, we're always teaching our kids right from wrong, right? We teach them that very young, but what does right from wrong really mean? Because some people's right might be wrong, right? So some people's wrong might be right. So we want to make sure that, as we're having conversations with our kids, that they can kind of take things apart. Constructively look at things, and it doesn't always happen early. I mean, there's some adults that still don't make good choices, right? That still impulsively make choices or don't necessarily think about things before they make choices. So we want to make sure that we're identifying problems and we can analyze things and have those conversations around it. And of course, problem solving. We want to teach our kids problem solving skills early. I mean, that's one of those things that some adults are still like, I have no idea. They throw things up in the air and they just, wherever it falls, I'm gonna do it, right? So we want to try and help our kids have problem solving skills. So like taking things apart, like if something's going on in your life, what did you do first? What did you do next? How do you handle that? A lot of times I talk to parents that have girls that are fighting with other girls, and they're like, I don't even know why we're fighting. It's like, well, let's talk about that, because sometimes that has a lot to do with how your self-perception, how you perceive yourself, and how another girl perceives you, how sometimes we're thinking of each other as a threat. So we're intimidated by others, like all those different things plays into our decision making and how we make choices. So you want to be able to have dialogue around what that means for us, those personal behaviors that we make that influence our choices. If that makes sense.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I want to be mindful of the time, because I know you need to wrap up a little early this morning to go to a wedding. But as always, this has been very rich, very informative. You've certainly given me a lot to think about. And based on the comments from the audience, I know that everyone has really been blessed by this and have a lot to
make sure I answer all the questions
work with. I think we covered the ones that were in the chat, but you're getting a lot of hearts and comments that are not questions. So just thank you so much. And I want to think about how we follow up on this, because these topics are so important and so important for the development of our children, and not something we always think about. Like a lot of helping them to survive and navigate the world is making sure they're fully developed human beings and equipping them with the tools to accurately assess themselves and others, and be empathetic and be aware and communicate appropriately. There's so much here that if they had all of this, will help to thwart a lot of the dangers that we talk about. It's not going to solve everything, but many of the biases in different environments that they face, I think like having these tools to be aware and how to respond will really go a long way. Absolutely. So thank you so much. And I just, I encourage you to enjoy the wedding today, but more importantly, enjoy the wedding of your son in 2 weeks, which is so exciting. So thank you for all you do. And any final parting words from you?
I would just love to say thank you so much for having me again. I always appreciate you all for joining in on these calls. If you do have any questions, I can put my information in the chat. I can stop sharing.
Yes. Somebody asked your information because they want you to come to a school district. I think the LA school district and others may want you to do workshops. So just give me the information and I will put it on the Facebook chat too.
Of course, they can contact me at my email, coachkumari@gmail.com, because it looks like I can only post to you and the parents.
Okay.
Yeah, coachkumari@gmail.com is my email. My phone number is 201.
I'm not going to be putting your phone number on the internet. That's like, that's for you.
Well, just to the parents who are here, 201.
I know, but we're live on Facebook.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. And the title of your book, that's something someone asked.
It is Real Talk, 10 Parenting Strategies to Raise Confident, Successful Children.
Okay. And how do we buy it?
You can go on Amazon and get it.
Okay, Real Talk. I'm just typing it again here. Real Parenting Strategies.
Real Talk, 10 Parenting Strategies.
Oh, 10. See, I'm messing it up already.
Real Talk, 10 Parenting Strategies.
Okay.
To raise confident, successful children. 10 parenting strategies to raise confident, successful children.
To raise confident, successful children, which is what we're trying to do. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And of course, we will talk soon. And thanks everyone for joining. Stay tuned for next month. Just look out on our Facebook page, Instagram, eBlast. If you're not on our email list, because that's the best way to stay abreast of what's going on, make sure you go to mobunited.org and sign up, subscribe to be a subscriber, or if you're a mom of a Black son, join the organization. So just look for subscribe or join. Okay? Thank you all so much. Have a great weekend and week.
You as well. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone. Bye.